and this isn't actually factual, perfect information. This is just what I've gleaned over the years. So the California gold rush, the 49ers, remember that? So everybody in the nation flocked to California because they were all going to go get rich. Well, after 10 years, some got rich and most didn't. They start coming back into Colorado. That's when the Colorado gold rush started, was 1859. So Hahn, Way, and Doyle were up at Empire. Now, Empire, Colorado, up kind of by Berthoud, is where most people were supplying for coming out into this wilderness. They supplied at Empire. So they met at Empire, and somebody knew of gold in this area. So Hahn, Way, and Doyle came in here about 1862 and started panning these little creeks, that are running down off the mountain. Now, the Civil War was going on from 1860 to 1865. So they didn't come back until the war was over, 1865. But the three of them and other miners came into this area to pan. And oh my gosh, they were so excited about it because they were seeing good gold sign here. So there were more miners than the three of them. I think, in fact, one place it said like there was 50 men in here. But all of the rest of the men said, we're leaving in the fall. We're going out. We'll come back in next spring. Except Hahn, Way, and Doyle, they said, no, we're going to overwinter because we'll get a jump on next year. They'd be ahead of everybody. So they spent their time building a shelter, a cabin, and panning and doing things. They didn't spend their time getting food. They didn't get a stock of food. But they kind of chose upside somehow. And Way was elected to take their gold that they had already panned back to Empire and supply them. Come back in with supplies so they could overwinter. Well, Captain Way took the gold and he never came back. So these guys were subsisting on rabbits and whatever little bit they had, which wasn't much. And they made it to about April. Well, now April up here is still winter. So they start heading back toward Empire. They get to Muddy Pass. Over there, coming over Rabbit Ears, Muddy Pass. Hahn succumbs on Muddy Pass. He can't go another step. It's a blizzard. So Doyle makes him as comfortable as he can and leaves him. He staggers on through the blizzard. He is found by cowboys looking for strays in this blizzard, and he survives. They go back to find Hahn, and Hahn has died. They're on the bank of the Muddy. So this whole area now is a big boom. I mean, they know there's gold here. So they need an investor. And I do not know how it happened, but John B. Farwell from Chicago was interested in this area. So he bought claims in this area. He came out and bought claims on Way Creek. So for an industrial placer operation, you have to have water because you have to have water under pressure. So you wash away the sands, gravel, and soil into sluice boxes. And the sluice boxes have riffles in it, and the heavier gold catches in the riffles. And so that's the idea of a placer mining. So up on Way Creek, they built their community. They built a dormitory for the men. They bought a cook shack. They built a cook shack. They built a little community up there. It was called International Camp. And they turned the water loose after they built the ditch and started it down the sluice boxes. And they shut the water off and went out to check. No gold. Well, that pretty much shocked him because he intended to get rich on that first shot down the sluice box. Well, he didn't. So he put in about 3 more years. And by 1879, he figures out he's been flim-flammed. They had salted those claims. And so he's selling out. He's a important guy and he wants to move on. So he sells his claims and the water rights to a bank in Rawlins. Well, he had brought a engineer in from Chicago also, and Robert McIntosh is the guy who was the superintendent of building this 27-mile long ditch. So when John Farwell gives up and says, I'm out of here, Robert McIntosh goes to Rawlins and buys the water and buys the claims. But Robert McIntosh said, I think I know where the gold is. He extended the ditch another mile from Way Creek to Little Mountain, and he brought the water down over in what is now, we're calling the McIntosh Bonanza, above Poverty Bar, and that's where he made it rich. He made all his money back in 2 months, plus more to spare, because then he went to Wyoming and bought a horse ranch. But at the same time now, Farwell over here was a very religious man. So in his community, there was no liquor, there was no wild women. It was very circumspect. But down here, this was called, Hahns Peak was called Poverty Bar. So at Poverty Bar, there were saloons, there was a hotel, there was mercantile, there was a supply place down here. So this is where the action was here at Poverty Bar. So McIntosh makes his money. He sells off to another couple of guys. They keep mining, and they keep finding gold over here. But McIntosh, he figures, he's a smart guy. He says, I've made my money. I'm going to go up and buy myself a horse ranch. So he goes up to Wyoming and partners with a Salisbury up there. And they buy a cattle and horse ranch. But then they split up. Salisbury takes the cattle and McIntosh takes the horses. And then also McIntosh built a store in Slater, and that's where he ended his days, was in Slater, Wyoming, just north of the line here. But anyway, then the Royal Flush, they mined for gold up here till the 20s. And so there was still gold up here that was being mined. But then about that time, the homesteaders and the ranchers started coming in. Well, then World War II, then by that time the gold was kind of played out, and by that time it was turning into homesteaders and ranchers.
It was the ranchers and farmers
and miners.
The Yampa Valley, the Elk River Valley, and the Snake River Valley, plus the miners that were here in Hahns Peak, which was over 1,000 miners at one time that were working here. And believe me, all those miners did not get rich.
And so they worked for wages.
They needed this money. So did those ranchers and farmers, because they had homesteads. They could live off of the land, but they couldn't pay their taxes.
The book says that this was the first industrial enterprise in Routt County. This John V. Farwell mining operation up here was the first industrial cash money project in Routt County. That's interesting, isn't it? It's amazing.